Welcome to the 12th episode of The Protective Factor, conversations that inspire hope and healing. I am Meghan Souter.
And I am Heather Pajak, Prevention Specialist with NJ4S Morris Sussex at the Mental Health Association. NJ4S, the New Jersey Statewide Student Support Service Program, is generously funded by New Jersey Department of Children and Families.
Be sure to like and follow on social media at NJ4S Morris Sussex and find this conversation and others in the series wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for joining us.
Welcome to the 12th episode of The Protective Factor. My name is Meghan Souter, and I am joined here with Heather.
Hello, I'm Heather. I'm one of the prevention specialists here at MHA for the NJ4S. So it's me.
And we are super excited to bring this conversation to you guys as we talk about teen dating violence and all the different aspects that encompass it. One of the reasons we picked this topic in particular is because I also work for JBWS, which is the Morris County Domestic Violence Center for women, men, and families that are experiencing intimate partner violence.
And I started at Sussex Counties. It's called DASI, and it's the same thing for men, women, and children and families. They have shelter and 24-hour 7 access. So that's a reason why I kind of chose that this is an important topic.
In addition to our personal and professional backgrounds within this topic, we also recognize that in the CDC's 2021 survey that 1 out of 12 youth would experience physical dating violence, and 1 out of 10 may experience sexual dating violence. Recognizing that those are absurd and high numbers, we want to bring the conversation and continue to talk about dating violence, what it entails, and ways that we can draw attention to it and combat it. So today on our conversation, we will cover all of that and more.
And we also want to recognize that this is a very difficult topic. So at any time, if you need to take some space, pause the video, or if you're listening, just take time for yourself. We're going to use a lot of words that may be triggering or may cause trauma. So again, we want you to find your safe space for yourself and just take time to reflect.
At the end of this episode will also be a list of resources available. And we want to emphasize that some of those resources may change based on the timing and the funding in different counties, but one that is always available is 988, and that is a national line that you can call, text, or use if you are feeling emotionally heightened or experiencing a mental health crisis.
Let's start.
Yeah. So to kind of jump us off into this topic, we recognize that intimate partner violence and teen dating violence can often change verbiage, and the words can look differently. So what are some of the other words that you've been aware of and have used in your professional or personal experience?
So intimate partner violence is a big one that has to do with somebody personal in a relationship. Maybe you have been previously in a relationship or even lived with. Another one that isn't talked about is interpersonal violence. So interpersonal violence is a little different. That has to go with families. That could be a stranger, it could be a neighbor. A lot of times those two get kind of confused. Sometimes when somebody would call in to a lot of places, they'd be like, my sister beat me up, that's intimate. No, that's interpersonal. Same with just domestic violence in general, physical violence, emotional violence, any of those. Some people believe, well, he didn't hit me, so it must not be domestic violence, which isn't the case. And we'll talk about a lot of those, like recognizing the physical, sexual, psychological, stalking. Those are other ones that I've heard a lot of. But some that people don't know about: financial, social abuse, technology abuse we'll go over, spiritual and religious abuse. That's another one. Coercions, cultural implications, pretty much all of those.
And I love it. And I think it's important to recognize that when we talk about this violence within a relationship, we're also looking at that relationship, whether it be an intimate one where there's sexual advances or you're dating, or it could be a family relationship where you live together, and that could be a different level of relationship. But a lot of the violence and a lot of what we're going to talk about today is really involved with that relationship factor, that connection, that trust, that relationship.
Signs. Yeah, signs, symptoms, anything that you might see in your teenagers or your youth, or even in your own household. You might not understand like certain things, or you may have seen a friend that may be going through something. So we'll go over that as well, and some safety planning, some other things that we'll bring up.
And a lot of times when we talk about intimate partner violence or domestic violence, there's this level of relationship that stems a level of power and control. And oftentimes we can recognize that a relationship may not be healthy or may not be positive when this power and control dynamic can be disrupted or unregulated.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about the power?
So there is, you can look it up too, there's called the power and control wheel. This wheel can look different for everyone. It depends. So the wheel pretty much has like everything. There can be intimidation, emotional abuse, isolation, economic abuse, and each part of the wheel kind of tells you another thing about it. So like isolation can mean staying away from friends or family, taking away their phones or other access. Isolation can also be blocking doorways and stuff like that. So you can't get out, so they feel trapped and they can't get anywhere. Another one is like threats. The abuser or person that is abusing could say something like, if you leave me, I'll kill myself. And then you feel bad. So because of that, you start to be like, well, I don't want to upset them. I don't want them to hurt themselves. So obviously I'm going to stay. I'm just going to do what they say.
And in that example, that's showing a level of emotional abuse and that coercion of trying to convince somebody to go along with what they want, with the manipulation of a threat or harm to themselves or somebody else. And sometimes we can engage in relationships and not realize that this power and control dynamic is happening right away.
So with the power and control wheel, when you're in a relationship, and a lot of times you don't understand the whole wheel. A lot of times what happens is you end up believing what the abuser is saying. You believe that the isolation is meant to be. You believe that, well, they're going to kill themselves or they're going to hurt themselves. So I have to stay in this. And that's where the power comes from. They kind of take over the situation. They take over the whole relationship. Because of that, you believe you're not good enough. This must be true. They're going to hurt themselves. They don't want me to see my friends. Sometimes for the isolation, for friendship, what they'll do is that. They'll tell you, well, they don't understand you. I understand you. So you feel more and more isolated. You feel more and more out of control. Hence the power and control. They take over the power, takes away your control.
That makes sense. And I like how you can recognize that they are kind of mutually exclusive. They go hand in hand. If somebody has that power, there's a good chance they also have that control. So finding a relationship where that is more balanced can lead to maybe a healthier outcome or a more successful relationship. And I know you mentioned with the power and control wheel, it sometimes leads into the individual believing what is being said. Is that any connection to those myths of why people don't leave or that isolation aspect? I know.
So yes. So I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And when I met my abuser, I was a teen. So it would have been very helpful to have all of this, but you tend to tell yourself, I'm supposed to be in this relationship. You're embarrassed. You don't want to tell people what's going on. You don't want people to see what's going on. The biggest myth out there is, why didn't they just leave? We'll hear it from families. We'll hear it from friends. If it's that bad, there's the door. Why didn't you leave? There's a lot of factors that play in that. Sometimes some people have kids. It's not that easy to leave. Another thing is, a big thing about this myth is it's actually more of a threat and more scary and can be more dangerous if somebody tries to leave. And if you speak to a lot of survivors, most of them will say, I did try to leave. I opened the door, he grabbed it. I tried to call someone, he broke my phone. I couldn't get out the door. The police came, but nothing came out of it. So the whole myth of why didn't you just leave, it's not that easy. Abuse can mess with you psychologically. It can rewire your brain. Your self-esteem can go down. So a lot of this, when it happens, you just feel like, well, I'm stuck. This is all I have. There is no going anywhere. That's not the case. There are many things out there that can help, we've seen. But that mindset becomes, this is it. And he said, I'm no good. I must be no good.
And I think in recognizing that sometimes it does take multiple attempts to leave prior to a full separation or a full leaving situation, it's important to recognize, because I know in my experience, I believe it's about 7 times that somebody tries to leave a relationship, that it may be choosing to use violence before they feel like they can fully separate themselves, like you mentioned, whether it be from other relationship responsibilities or children or finances or that social support. And I think that myth alone is one of the main reasons why it's important that we have these conversations. And talking about the power and control wheel, we can recognize how it can be hard to recognize a lot of these signs and symptoms, and how often things overlap between what's accessible in individuals' mental health, well-being, and what support they have.
Exactly. And especially the signs and symptoms. A lot of times we don't see these things. So some symptoms or signs can be, they're more pulled away. They're not, for teens, maybe they stopped doing activities they liked or stopped hanging out with their friends. So other stuff can be substance use or harming themselves. You could see signs of that. As a friend or even a family member, just to take a minute to they're acting a little differently. Maybe I should how are you doing? On the abuser side, we have to look at that too. They may be more aggressive, more angrier. Maybe you hear them talking certainly about, she, or he didn't call me back. How dare they? Listen for these signs so that you can address them. Otherwise, it can spiral out of control. And you may lose, your way of looking at it. You may see them and just kind of be like, oh, something's up with them. They're not eating as much, or they don't ever want to hang out or go to the mall or do something like that. So, yeah, these are some signs that depression is another one.
Yeah, and recognizing that teens are in the time of their life where they're learning to have relationships and they're learning to interact with each other. So I think recognizing that some mental health symptoms like anxiety, depression, but especially isolation, and more so than just I don't want to hang out with my parents. It's this level of isolation where maybe you can only hang out with your significant other, or you can only do things that your significant other is involved in or approves of. And on the flip side too, recognizing that our teenagers are not only one part of the relationship, there are those other individuals that might choose to use violence in relationships, or might be displaying some manipulation, some coercion, and some control that as a teenager, we can still have those conversations and address that behavior before they become problematic or before they become an intimate partner violence relationship. So I think recognizing those signs and symptoms is really important, and I appreciate you mentioning that too, where both sides of the coin are something that we can look at.
Yes, and getting it in the beginning is always, it's like the early intervention. Just get in there before it gets out of control, because some don't know how to have healthy relationships sometimes, and that's the only thing that's going on, and some might be having some troubles at home or something else is bothering them, and that could be why.
I think that's really important. And also recognizing that teens nowadays are also navigating these relationships with some new factors. I know we mentioned it a little bit earlier in the conversation, but also this impact of technology and how technology has changed the relationships we have. We can recognize that there's a level of power and control that can happen online depending on our social media, our followers, our engagement. But what other aspects of technology do you feel like are important to be aware of?
Tracking. That's a big one now. Tracking is a huge one. I know for myself, I have children, so of course I have a tracking. But when you're in a relationship, that person might be like, Why did you go there? I thought you were at your friend's house. Why are you now here? You were supposed to be here in 15 minutes. Where are you now? Like, these are things that have grown a lot. And like you were saying about technology, even online, social media, why did you like that person? Why did you heart that? Why did you comment on that person? You don't know them. Are you dating them? What's going on? So these can make the power and control even more amplified, especially if they feel like they're being stepped on or overstepped or you're not paying attention to me. But the tracking one is a huge one now. That's a huge one now.
I definitely want to mention the tracking one. I know we've heard of it in a few different scenarios now, whether it's from our prevention consultant roles with MHA or even just talking with young children that we know. But sharing their location, whether it's like Find My iPhone, but also recognizing other apps allow you to track locations like Snapchat. You can be visible or invisible, as well as where you tag different like geolocations online and stuff. But I definitely think who you share your location with can give people a lot of power and control. And that's...
Yeah. And it can be healthy. There are healthy times, you know, with your friends, you're going on a date or something. You kind of want to be like, hey, keep track of me while I'm on this. But there's also so many more. There's air tags now. There's other things that people can have on their cars or in their backpack they didn't even know about. But yeah, I believe tracking is good to a certain extent. Then it can become too much.
And it's important to have those conversations with youth and beforehand. This way, this is an open conversation where you can say, hey, I heard that Sam from your math class wants to have your location. Why do they want your location? What is it going to help? What is it for? And really being able to be mindful about who we give access to in which ways.
Yeah, that open conversation.
As well as seeing like their location and seeing who is following who on social media. I know that a bunch of other terms have been popular online, like gaslighting, love bombing, trauma bonding, things like that. Have you felt like technology impacted any of those terminologies or interactions with intimate partner violence?
I believe those terms have always been there. It's just technology, yes, has made it more. We see it in movies. We see it, you know, daily life. People talk about it. We hear people say, I'm triggered or I have trauma, or it's become more open, which I think is great because it was always there. It's just people didn't really talk about it. And now it's getting brought up into light now. You know, there's books, there's movies that talk about gaslighting, that talk about trauma bonding. And we'll get into that like more later, like in another time, because those terms alone, there's a whole nother thing we could do with that. Just because a lot of teens don't know that. Like love bombing, just for an example, love bombing to a teen or someone young is, he loves me, he bought me 1,000,000 flowers, he's there every time, he must care. When it can be actually very extreme. But terms like that, yes, I think that they were always there, just they were kind of hidden. Now they're out in the open more.
And now that they're out in the open more, I think it's a great opportunity for us to start the conversation and to kind of recognize, like we're saying, if he's saying, I love you, I love this, I'm buying you all this gifts, we can have that conversation with our teen or each other and say, what does this mean? How does this impact our relationship? Are these gifts out of a love language and how our partner communicates that they care for us? Or are these gifts out of power, control, and manipulation? And how do we encourage our teens to have that conversation or start those conversations?
I would say just have that openness with them. Make sure that they know it's okay to come to me. Even if it's the most embarrassing thing or most private thing, I'm here for you. That's the biggest thing when it comes to any kind of domestic violence. I'm here for you. To hear that and to know I can sit down and be open and honest with you breaks that wall, breaks that barrier, so that people can start to open up, especially teens. They don't want to talk to their parents. They don't want to have that conversation. But having that wall down can make it healthier and can make them come to you and be like, I don't know, I saw you and, you know, maybe mom and dad do this, but my relationship's a little different. He does this or she does this to me. So it can be a more eye-opener. It can help them kind of relax, break down that wall, talk to them. before it's too late.
I also hear from what you're saying, even using some different medias, whether it be TV shows or books or things that do show maybe unhealthy and healthy relationships, and having those conversations about it from the get-go before our teens are entering romantic relationships, and being able to identify and process how they would respond in those situations. So, in also recognizing the impact of social media and technology on the power and control wheel, there's also been this element of promposals and things posted online that might influence and coerce people's response or engagement in relationships. So I wanted to get your feedback on that a little bit.
So I believe in society and human behavior, we want the surprises. We want the big flashy. We want the guy on his knee with the ring and, oh, look at all my friends are here. And that's kind of where promposals kind of came in, where suddenly it was like the big flashy thing. I have the sign, I showed up. And it's become huge in the TikTok world and everywhere else where, you know, they came to my house and they had a horse and carriage. It was a big thing. And of course, on one side, this is so romantic. But like I said about the love bombing, that could be over the top. And what if you're not comfortable? What if you don't like all the people, or you don't like surprises? I know a lot of people that don't like surprises for birthdays alone. So how do you handle that? Like, what do you do to kind of be like, whoa, I don't feel comfortable, but still make it a surprise? So that's the difference. You know, if you have the conversation with someone, listen, I know you want to do this. I really, you know, I love that, but I'm not comfortable with it. I will go to prom, but I don't want this big flashy thing. That could be great. But on the other end, how do you have that conversation when the person's like, well, I wanted to make it a big surprise and I thought I was doing something nice. So I think there's like a back and forth with that, and it's hard. You should be able to have boundaries. You should be able to have that conversation with people.
And I think what you're mentioning too there is something that maybe when we're enter adult relationships or long-term relationships, we have that time and that foundation built, like where, say, if you are going through with the proposal, there's a good chance that you know the person's response before you buy the ring, before you schedule out the photographer or the fanfare. So as much as these promposals are fun and we do want them to be enjoyable and things, there is also this important conversation that maybe happens behind the scenes that people don't always notice, where it is important for the two people that are involved to talk about it beforehand. To say, hey, prom's coming up. I would love to go with you. I want to ask you in a big way. Is that okay with you? And that person can say yes or no before there's all these eyes and all of this pressure being placed on you. And even keeping that in mind, where when we're helping our teens navigate relationships, also helping them navigate rejection and how to understand that a no doesn't have to be personal. It could be so many other things going on in life.
Yeah, and going back to what we talked about before, that's another sign and symptom. You know, what if they say no and then that person gets very violent or angry or starts yelling? Kind of what we call the red flags, like, oh, this is what we're talking about. Like, start to see these things. Talk to both sides as a parent. You know, it's okay if you're rejected. It's okay if this person doesn't want to do that. That's totally fine. Doesn't mean they don't like you, just maybe they don't like that.
And I think that's part of the important aspect of the conversation, where we can hope that kids recognize a lot of these red signs and red flags, but often it's in hindsight. It's in looking back. So it's kind of our job as adults, as parents, as caregivers, to kind of hold up that flag sometimes if our kids aren't seeing it right away. Whether that's they get a prom proposal and they're all excited and happy, and even just saying, hey, are you okay with how public that was? Did you know this was coming? And checking in with our kids and making sure that they are having those conversations that might happen behind closed doors, because we don't always see them or talk about them. But a lot of times, relationships need to have those conversations and offer that consent.
Yep, consent is key. That's my big one. So yeah, I agree with that.
Is there any way that you would advise that we start that conversation about consent with our youth, with our kids?
There is ways of doing it. You can be point blank, I want to talk to you. Like, I know this is going to be uncomfortable. I know you probably am the parent, ew, whatever. But having that conversation, sit down, let's talk about this. Is there anything that makes you uncomfortable? Is there anything you don't like about certain things? Let them speak with no judgment. As soon as you put judgment into it, they will end up being like, I don't want to do this anymore. And they're going to back away. And then you're going to have that closure again, like that wall, like I said. Sit down, have the conversation. It's tough. It's a tough conversation. And sometimes we don't want to hear what our teens have to say. But at the same time, it's the only healthy way to do it. And you can start teaching them about boundaries. Also, modeling yourself. Model healthy relationships. Model good things like that. Open conversations. Good self-talk. Stuff like that so that you could have more, open conversations.
And it sounds like it's an ongoing conversation where it's something that you continuously look at, you continuously model and involve what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important aspect to recognize because this isn't something that will show up overnight. This isn't something that will just all of a sudden be there one day when it wasn't. But if we can continue to talk about it and talk about what we're comfortable with, where we are in our relationships and how we feel, it can continue to lead opportunities to recognize those red flags maybe before they're like plastered on the big board. Like we want to catch them when they're still small red flags.
Yes. And domestic violence doesn't happen overnight. That's another big thing. It's, well, didn't you see it happening? Weren't there red flags? Wasn't there? No. A lot of times you're in a relationship for a very long time before anything happens. Sometimes it can be right away. Sometimes it can be later on. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be in a domestic violence. If we were in any relationship and your partner hurt you the first day, you'd be out, of course. But because it takes time, power, and control, that cycle over and over, there might be good days and then it goes right back to bad days. You may have weeks of happiness and then an explosion happens. Those things break you down slowly. And as it breaks you down, it becomes more and more isolating, more and more, I can't go anywhere. There's nothing I can do about this. This was just meant to be. And again, like we talked about with conversation, teaching your children, that's not okay. This wheel is not all right. You don't want to, the honeymoon stage, they'll call it. You don't want that. You don't want the honeymoon stage and then a fight breaks out. But it's okay, he bought me flowers, but now we're fighting again. It just keeps going, having that conversation going.
And that's what they often say with domestic violence relationships. There's that cycle where you are in that honeymoon phase, you're having everything's fine, everything's good. Something starts to escalate. There's a big explosion, there's a big fight, there's whatever sort of violence you want to fill in the blank with. And then, as you mentioned, that honeymoon phase, whether that's the love bombing, the giving of gifts, the I will never do that again. And for a good portion of it, there's some truth to there. That person might not recognize that they are choosing to use abuse, and they might truly want to change and grow. But other times, that's not the case. So it's important to be able to recognize that cycle. And also to have, like you mentioned, those skills to say, hey, I'm getting off this cycle. Mm-hmm. I am isolated. They are trying to use violence in my relationship. Now what can I do?
And having those talks, like we were talking about and all that, letting them know it's not just physical. It cannot just be sexual. It cannot just be emotional. There's so much more to it that we don't think about. Like I said, the financial. He or she could take your money from you and just be like, I'll hold on to it. That can be abuse. We don't think of these things. We just think of, he just wants to hold my money for me. Here you go. He's being nice. No, that's power and control again. It all goes back to that. But as a parent, teaching your kids, it's not just physical. It's not just mental. Here are the other things that it could be. Could really open up more for teens, even adults, just to know. Because many calls that I've ever gotten were, I had no idea that was abuse. He didn't hit me, So obviously it's not abuse. Yeah, that's not the case. That is abuse, what he's done. So yeah, it can happen. But I think having the conversations, it all goes back to that. Just breaking down that barrier, talk to them. Here's all of the things that are abuse.
Thank you for sharing that about the cycle of domestic violence, and in noting that when you leave a relationship that could be one of the most dangerous times, it can be hard to support a friend that is trying to leave, or also leave a relationship if you are the individual. So is there any sort of tool or trick that you would advise people to use during that time?
So safety planning, which is a plan pretty much for safety, but each individual one is different because everybody else is different. Some people you could safety plan, they have a car, some people don't. So you always have to come up with something that works for them and that they feel comfortable with. Anything about domestic violence is never force the person. If they don't want to leave the relationship, you're not going to haul them out and get them out of it. There's no way. If you have a conversation with them and you're like, no, you're in violence right now, and they're like, no, I'm not. There's not much that you're going to say to change their mind. You're not going to be like, yes, you are, and this is the end. Here we go. I'm taking you away. It won't work. They'll push back. They will defend their abuser. They will defend their decision because, like I said, it's embarrassing, and it can be very scary. Leaving is scary.
And at the same time, if you're forcing them to leave, you're then distributing your own power and control over that person. So
Yes.
it's not
So you don't
empowering them.
Yeah. And you definitely don't want to push anything. It's about empowering someone to move, like to get up off that floor that they've been on, not about pushing them back down. So with the safety plan, you can do many different things. Some are have a trusted friend or family member. If you have that person that knows what's going on, very open to the situation, and they're very there for you, come up with a code word. I like one for the code word is if I gave you a call and I was just like, hey, could you give me that banana bread recipe that we always love? That's your signal to call 911 for me. This way, if my abuser's around or I can't have the phone or they want it on speaker to hear, you can be like, sure, I'll send it right over to you. I'll mail it to you or I'll email it to you. That gives me the acknowledge you're going to call the police and I'm safe. Have a bag packed at all times. That's another one. Have it in your car or somewhere hidden. A key, an extra key made if you can. Sometimes for adults, it's a little different. If they have children, you can teach the child to like flip a light switch on and off so that the neighbor knows like something's going on. Always have a trusted person. Even if they don't understand why you're doing it and they can't, they're like, I don't get it. Why aren't you just leaving? Like we said, you at least have someone there to kind of come up with that safety plan. Have friends, have family, have phone numbers. Some people buy hidden phones, even if they're like the little prepaid ones, have that hidden. The biggest one is for me too, whoever your trusted person is, any evidence you may have, because you might need to use it. And any bruises, text messages, calls, you can even screenshot how many times they called you. Send it to that person and they can save it. Because if at any time they get into your phone or your phone breaks or your computer breaks, you have no evidence of that if you ever need to go to the police or anything. Your trusted person has all of it and can release it. I call it the releasing the Kraken. Like, there you go. You can just give all the information again. But that's the thing. Every safety plan is different. You're going to talk to someone who's going to say, no, I'm not leaving. Trust that person, understand that person, come up with a safety plan maybe. Okay, you're going to stay in the relationship. Let's have a safety plan for that. How does that look for you? Always have them involved in the safety plan because it can be very easy to just go, no, I'm not doing that. No, I'm not doing that. What looks safe for you? Okay, you want to stay in the relationship. I totally get that. I support you. I'm here if you need me. But let's come up with some ideas, even if it's something small. Like, okay, can you at least check in with me sometimes? Like if I know something, just a quick hi, like so I know you're okay.
Like an opposite code word, like banana bread means I'm all good tonight.
Banana bread is good.
Whatever
it doesn't have to be bad. Yeah. Do stuff like that. Let the person know you're always there. The biggest thing I've seen for not only myself when I was through it and others is family and friends turn their back. And when they turn your back, you're more isolated and you're more alone and you have no one. So you believe this is the only person that can be there for me. If you're always there, even if you don't like what they have to say, just be there for them. and keep that open line of communication over and over.
And I think it's important, like you mentioned, to recognize that safety planning will be very different depending on the type of intimate partner violence or violence that somebody is experiencing, their means and access, and what they're willing to do, recognizing that we do want to empower somebody. So if their safety plan doesn't include ending the relationship, maybe their safety plan includes giving up social media, so that's one less area, or making a different social media account under a different name and finding different ways. I also like that you mentioned the aspect of keeping evidence, because unfortunately we do have to recognize the different systems need different evidence, different levels of proof, different factors. So if you are experiencing violence and you're not sure, it is really helpful to document it, whether it's sending it to a safe person. I've had clients that have actually emailed themselves, because when you email, you have a time, a date, and stamp, and that stuff can't get tampered with. But if you're unsure, truly collect as much evidence as you can. And when you are ready, look at a safety plan. Look at what that might sound like, feel like to you, and like you're saying, really make it customizable. But with that in mind, sometimes it can be hard if somebody is in a relationship and they aren't able to recognize the signs of abuse, or the individual is choosing to use violence. So as a friend of somebody that may be in one of those relationships, how would you navigate that?
So again, listen without judgment. That's a big one. Make sure that you have that conversation with them and just tell me everything. No hold barred, go ahead, tell me whatever it is. You don't want them to hold back on anything. Like, no, it's okay. They really do this, but they don't do this. And give them the red flags. Kind of have that open listening skill where if we're having a conversation, I can kind of mirror it back. Like, okay, so what you're saying is, he said, you can't do this, and then you did that. How does that sound when I say it back to you? How do you feel when you hear that? It kind of gets the person to think like, oh, well, if you came to me and said that, I'd be like, run. But you see what we're doing? Like, you're not really. So what can we do to kind of change this? Same with a parent. If a parent hears, a child or anything, like, I think my friends in abuse, talk to them, have that conversation. Why do you think that? What did you hear that may seem alarming, or that red flag, or what kids call it today, ick? Be able to address those things in a way where it's like, okay, is this abuse or is this just teens? The problem is it's that thin line. We're not sure. And a lot of people don't want to get involved. That's a big thing too. I don't want to get involved. It's their business. I'm staying out of it. You could, how close you are to the parent or anything, maybe it's your own child or someone else, you could come to them. You could be like, hey, listen, I heard some concerning things. Don't know if it's real or not, but let's have a conversation. Everything's back to conversation and believing. Have that conversation. Do you see this sometimes? Maybe he or she acts like this sometimes. Have you ever noticed anything like that? These things will kind of open that gate to be like, oh, that's actually not okay. And going from there. Again, it's very thin line, only because if I came to you and I said, you're in abuse and I'm calling the police right now, and if you actually were, that's dangerous. That's a very dangerous thing. And you could back away. You could run, not in a good direction, and it could turn into something worse. And then you've lost the person, and you don't want to do that. You want to take it slow. Baby steps is the way. This way, when you have that conversation and they start to be like, you're right, this isn't healthy. You're right, this person does this to me. What do I do? Help me. That's a big thing. Help me. If you can get to that point, that's perfect. But if you jump too quickly, that could backfire very quickly. And you don't want that to happen. You want it to be slow, mirror the talk. How does this feel? What do you hear when I say this? And go from there.
I like that idea, kind of like breadcrumbing the person along to either recognize what you're recognizing, or to have that opportunity to say, hey, I hear that you see it like this, but that's not what's happening. And giving the person that opportunity to define it for them. I know when I run weekly support groups, oftentimes clients report back that in the relationship, they did not see it. They did not see the signs of abuse. They did not see all of the red flags that maybe somebody on the outside saw, but it was often that breadcrumbing that allowed them to stay open-minded and to recognize just because I am experiencing violence or I'm a victim of domestic violence does not make that the whole person. It does not make me who I am. With this breadcrumb idea, it kind of allows that person to come to that realization on their own and recognize where their boundaries are and what they're willing to tolerate or what they know as a non-negotiable, and where they can then lean on others for support that, hey, I never told you what you had to do, but I told you I didn't like the way this was going on.
And you know I'm here. The empowering. It's all about empowering that person to get up. And that's what's empowering. I led myself to that. I figured that out. Oh, I see this happening. That's where you start to build up your self-esteem. That's where you start to build yourself back up. So then when the person goes, that looks like a red flag, you may see it now. You may tell yourself, oh, I do see it. It is there. You're right. I get it now. But again, if you move too quickly, it could go the worst. And if you report it too quickly, it could either do two things. It could harm the person. They could be in more danger, or they can just isolate themselves to the point where they'll never speak to you again. And I've seen that happen. And you don't want that. You want them to know that you're there. And that, again, let me know when you're ready, and I will, we'll say it again, release the Kraken.
I'll be there for you.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a really important factor to recognize, like once our friends or our teens are in these relationships, that we can't just go in and pull them out. We have to let them find their path to come out on their own of that relationship, of that journey. But also recognizing that some of our teens aren't in relationships yet. So is there anything that we can do or we can help in place before as a way to protect and be able to have those conversations?
Yeah, know your own boundaries, know your own self-worth, know your own things that you don't feel comfortable with. I know it sounds ridiculous, write them out if you need to. Maybe you like someone and you're just the pros and cons thing everybody makes fun of, but usually you can kind of get an idea of how you feel about someone or yourself. You want to make sure that whatever it is, you're comfortable and that you have consent. And if you don't feel comfortable in something, don't do it. That's the biggest thing. But I would say learn about the terms, learn about different abuses. Of course, sometimes we get in our own head and we're like, that's abuse. I know it because they said this. And really you're like, whoa, I'm going out. But if you learn about these things, have the open communication with your children, have communication as teens with your friends, be okay with being like, this is wrong. This is okay. Doing that, I think, can open up like a lot for your relationship. Having your self-worth, having your boundaries, knowing that you're okay. If you want to say no to something, or no, I don't like that you track me. Go away now. That's okay. These things are okay. Knowing it's okay. I think that's the big thing. Just knowing that saying no or not being okay with something is okay.
And I think recognizing too that self-worth can really stem from a lot of different things, whether that's like the activities that you're involved in, the company, the friends that you keep, the relationship that you have with caregivers and mentor figures, even from a young age, can really kind of help or hinder this process of building relationships. And I know at JBWS they mention relationship armor as being some of those things, as some of those boundaries, like you mentioned, writing out, I will not tolerate this, I will tolerate this, or here's my non-negotiables. But also, here are the things that make me me. Here are the things that I will not give up, no matter what my partner says, or no matter what my partner tries to coerce or power or control over me. And having, like you said, that self-worth to uphold that and how you feel. Also, in recognizing that teens and parents sometimes have these different relationships, it can be hard to hear things from our parents or hear things from our friends. But I think trying to have that even flow between parents and friends and everybody being on the same page can be really helpful. So it can be hard to talk to your kids or talk to your friends' kids or your kids' friends about some of these things, but always having that openness to have that conversation and call out what might not be okay in a nice way, in a gentle way, that people will be part of that conversation can be really important.
Yes, it's about not scaring the person. If I came to you and scared you, you wouldn't be like, oh, we're not having to talk anymore. You have to stay calm. You have to stay non-judgmental. You have to just be, I'm here for you. I'm listening. Whatever you want to do, I support. As soon as you say that, it kind of puts a light switch on and you're like, okay, so if I say no to you, you're still going to support me. Yes, I'll still support you.
And I recognize sometimes when I talk with youth and they're telling me about their relationships, sometimes I'll even respond with like, what does that mean to you? Because sometimes our youth will be like, oh, I have a boyfriend. And what that means to them is very different than what it might mean to us as an adult. So I think keeping that curiosity and keep on asking and following up with like, how did you feel about that? Or what does that mean to you? And how does that make you feel? Do you feel safe? Do you feel supported? Can really be pillars and be parts of the conversation that will navigate change and really help us talk about how to treat people.
Yeah, it's like the breadcrumbs again. They're going to get to the conclusion. They're going to figure it out at the end. It's just about on the receiving end how it works.
As we start to wrap up, as a parent, what would you feel is something important to know or to take away in regards to having youth that might be experiencing a relationship?
You're not alone. That there are many people out there that are survivors and that you can do it and that it is difficult and it is extremely hard and you're going to have days that you wake up and you're going to hate it. But there's always somebody there that's willing to help and listen, always. No matter if it's your parent, a friend, or even the hotlines. Somebody out there is listening and believes you and just feel believed. As soon as you feel that, you feel hope.
I think that was beautifully said. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Protective Factor. We just wanted to highlight the National Domestic Violence Resource at 1-800-799-SAFE, as well as Morris and Sussex agencies, JBWS and DASI, as well as the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence.
We also have a Parent Academy series coming up. Take a look on our social media for anything coming up for that. We will be talking more about domestic violence, tips, and other things in the Parent Academy, but follow us if you can.
We'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Have a great day.